right, I think it's about to, yeah, there it is. Okay. So, welcome to the Paranormal Misfit podcast. I really appreciate you going on. For everyone who doesn't know, this is Chad. He is with the Dr. Ghost Hunters. You can find them on YouTube, and he's here today to talk about his background as far as the paranormal, and then also a couple of his experiences that I've got to check out on YouTube. So, with that being said, Chad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. And thanks for having me, Chrissy. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be on. So, like you said, I'm Chad. I started a YouTube paranormal page with my wife and friends. We are Dr. Ghost Hunters on YouTube. And, you know, the premise around this, my buddy Jason, who's also in our videos, we started paranormal investigating about a decade ago, kind of tiptoeing around the subject. Interestingly enough, it seems like we've come a long way in the paranormal field over the past year on how open people are to talk about it or not, at least out in my neck of the woods. And so I guess to give a little bit of background with Jason and I before fully kind of jump into our page, we met each other in med school. We're in the same med school class. And I remember one day, like we were just kind of, it must have been Halloween right around that time. And we were both kind of talking about some haunted things and spooky things. And then I think that was around the time that, Ghost Hunters, the original crew, is still going strong. And I think I mentioned to him, like, hey, there's this show on TV. Like, you ever want to get together? Like, we can have some beers and wings and watch this thing. And at that time, like, it's not just kind of mainstream like it is now where everyone talks about it. And so I was really tiptoeing to see his reaction. And he's like, yeah, like I'm totally into that thing. And of course, we didn't say that around our other classmates for fear of ridicule, but kind of around that time, kind of got into it because of that TV show. And we're based out of Salt Lake City. And so soon after that, we started kind of looking around to see if there were places to investigate with some very kind of primitive ghost hunting equipment at that time, which I'm sure we've all used. And that has evolved over the past 10 years or so. And then really over the last year, my wife's always kind of not put up with, but semi-embraced my paranormal endeavors. She's always been great about it. Sarah, she's also on the channel. And then a couple of her friends started to be a little bit intrigued as well. And the more we started talking about it, we're like, guys, we've got some great locations out here in Salt Lake, and we can travel to other spots. And we started doing it and had a blast in doing so. And we would just kind of make an event out of it beforehand and planning it, especially during the pandemic when there wasn't a whole lot going on. That was something we could still get together and plan and do. And soon after that, we said, you know what? It would be a whole lot of fun if we started documenting our adventures so that not only we could have these and go back and look at, but maybe other people could enjoy what we do too. And we can kind of bring them along and being able to watch. And that's where our YouTube channel, which really we just fired up a couple months ago, that's how that kind of evolved.
And I'm not gonna lie, I deep dived into your YouTube channel. I started with the video you had sent me and I was like, this is awesome. And then you guys had made mention about the I don't remember who it was, but someone who was kind of playing with the mirrors and said Bloody Mary a few times. Then I jumped back to that episode. I was like, I gotta see what this is. And I thought, I was like, wow, you guys do a really great job. It was, I like the different, the way you kind of either debunk things or tried to explain it out. It really reminds me of Ghost Hunters, because my biggest thing with ghost hunting shows is that there's not enough of debunking, and there's more so just oh, this is evil, oh, this is a demon. And I really enjoyed the fact that you guys didn't just immediately go into that kind of stuff. And honestly, it was very humorous for me, because I like how you guys kind of edited your video, gave the little feedbacks on the side. The girls went out shopping while you and your friends stayed behind.
Exactly.
So, but with that being said, so how does your point of view and your medical background kind of help you keep that open mind, but also that healthy side of skepticism when you're listening and you're looking through all of your evidence that you kind of collect over the time?
That's a great question, because it definitely influences the way I approach the paranormal, certainly Jason as well. And then Annie, or Bridget, who's on the show, she also works in healthcare. So we all kind of have this similar mindset, like in our professional lives. And I think that influences what we do and how we investigate. And then we're also influenced by the content that we watch and that we consume, right? In some way or another, whether we're skeptical of it and we say, nah, that's not really my thing, or we say, hey, I kind of like this approach. And I certainly think that the ghost hunters thing, being that that was the kind of initial show, at least for our generation, that was on TV, certainly being influenced by that. So in my day job, it's everything that I say to patients and do and try to practice. It's all surrounding evidence, right? It's like, what has been studied, what has been trialed, and how are things going to be safe? How are we going to disprove that this is going to work for you? And that's what patients expect. And so that's how I've lived for the past decade. And so it seems like a natural kind of transition with the paranormal as well. And there's some things, and we can probably talk a little bit about this later, but even the experiences that I think Jason and I have had in real time, you won't necessarily see us have the same reactions, like the over the top reactions, because immediately in my mind, I think it's so trained to try and figure out why something is happening, as opposed to like, oh, something just yanked on the back of my shirt at this haunted VRBO. And like, that's really weird and that shouldn't happen. And I should probably be afraid. So it's very bizarre. But then so I guess to answer your question, we try to be very skeptical about things that can happen, because it's very hard in the paranormal world to really prove that these things exist, right? Like, even with all the gadgets that we have, there's always something else that could trigger it or set it off. And unless we get a really good photograph or a really good video or a really good EVP, it's hard. It's really hard. So we definitely have a very curious and a very fascinated approach to it, but also try to be very skeptical to make sure that what we react to might truly be something paranormal that we can't explain. So, with that, Chrissy, you mentioned earlier that the video made you laugh, and that makes me happy, because part of what we try and do on our show is, like I said, kind of bring the camaraderie that we have during the investigation and make it entertaining, because I feel like sometimes that component is missed. And so it's certainly something that we try to add into. But certainly a whole bunch of different ways to approach things. And that is, at least early on in our content making, that's the approach that we've tried to use.
That is awesome. And I wholeheartedly appreciate it, because I'm actually obtaining my nursing degree. So like, I think in that kind of analytical sense.
Right.
The whole background of like, just the whole thing in science where they teach you, you got your hypothesis, and then and the thing about ghost hunting is you're not really in a super controlled environment. So that's where where I find a lot of the discrediting happens, is because they're like, well, they're not in a controlled environment and there's so many different elements and you can't prove it.
Right.
And it doesn't matter, there are some really good photos out there. Some of them are photoshopped and some of them aren't. And the issue is because there's a lot of Photoshop that usually ends up discrediting the actual ones. So that's where where like there's still like a lot of growth that needs to happen within the paranormal community for it to be more on a scientific level, for the scientists basically to kind of be like, yeah, this is real, kind of.
No, I couldn't agree more. And Jason and I, even over the last couple of weeks, we've talked a lot about that. We're like, how do we set up a control experiment, like while we're ghost hunting, to really try to prove that, it's not someone receiving a text message from their phone that they thought they put on silent that triggers a REM pod to go off? Or, how do you do that to really try and get that skepticism, not only get that away, but also to be able to prove that there's something abnormal going on? So we hope to do that with our future investigations, but we're still brainstorming what that looks like. Because like you said, unless I'm just not aware of it, I don't know that there's a perfect way to do that at least has been mainstream and widespread. So if you have any ideas or anything that pops up, we are all ears and we are more than welcome to try them.
To be fair, your wife being the more heavy skeptic of the group actually really does help, because she was sitting there and she's just like, no, that can't be it. No, that can't be it. And
Also,
I think that helps.
it's true. I think that I've probably desensitized her a bit. You know, every time I watch one of these shows, like I'll put up YouTube or Discovery Plus when I'm on the treadmill just running, and I get done. I'm like, honey, guess what just happened? You'll never guess what they found. And, you know, 10, 20 times a day, she's like, okay, Chad, like that's enough. So I probably don't help out with some of that skepticism, but we do like to have that as a good balance. And hopefully that helps in the exact way that you mentioned.
Yeah. So moving on. So what has been your first, what do you guys do to prep for your location? And then what so far has been your favorite location?
Yeah, good question. So the prep is something that has evolved. And as our group has kind of expanded from just Jason and I to also having my wife, Sarah, and then we have Jamie and Annie, it's become a little bit trickier to prep. Like part of that prep involves, you know, making sure that everyone can show up at a certain time and that everyone kind of has their own assignment. So some of the things that we've learned, I think that we're still learning, is going into a spot, we really like to try and know if there's any type of historical context to a home, which I think is kind of standard. And you've done this, right, on some of your podcasts where you've talked about the history of a location. And we found that sometimes that's really important because it plays into the activity that we found. But also other times we have found that there may not be any history at all, and that we really have to open up our eyes and try and figure out why a place may be haunted. So historical context is big. We use, at least I use, a couple of websites that I usually try to look at. I think Dead in the Home or Dead in the House, just to see if anyone passed away, because that's kind of a common thread, right? If someone passed away, they may be likely to haunt it. And then if we know that there's a certain name that is associated with a haunting, then I even like to pull up like ancestry.com and try and figure out who their relatives are and find out a little bit more about them, so that you can bring some of that to your approach when you're investigating, and not necessarily to call out a spirit or call out their family, but use that as a part of establishing a rapport to be able to try and talk with them. So those two websites, as far as the research, is really important. Of course, gear. So I've really enjoyed buying a lot of gear over the past year. And even as we speak, like we have an investigation coming up just 2 days from the time that we're recording now. The entire back half of my office is just covered in things that are charging. So the charging, the prep, the SD cards, all of those things, the labeling, the organization. My wife's a professional organizer, so that has kind of helped out too. But I'm getting a little sidetracked. So organization, research, and then almost trying to have a game plan of who is going to investigate where in the location. If we know a layout of the location, that's certainly helpful, but also being willing to go with the flow during an investigation, right? Because we never really know what's going to happen. So we try to have a game plan, know the things that we want to attack and approach, but also being open to seeing what comes to us. So I think that's the prep. And before I go into like favorite spots, do you have anything else that you would add to that? Like if you were to go out, or when you check out places, or any things that you've heard? I'm always curious to learn.
So it's funny, right? Like I will, my husband will wholeheartedly tell you. So we don't live far from St. Augustine, which is the oldest city in Florida, right? And they
Right.
are known for tons of ghost tours. And one of the ghost tours we did, they took us into the actual haunted locations with like some little meters and walked around. And I can tell you right now, I am an absolute scaredy cat. Like all of a sudden I start getting tingles and I'm like, I don't like it. but for some strange reason, I love this kind of like content and everything. But for me, I feel like one is research. And then two is also maybe talking to a few sources who may have either had an experience, or people who have heard, like rumors. Rumors are one of those weird things that's like, is it a rumor? Is there historical fact to it? Because if you always notice, sometimes either the historical facts start to get distorted, or the rumor itself took like a very minute historical fact and then just blew it up depending on the telephone line it went down. So for me, it's a lot of it is research. And then I haven't really seen, like, to me, the equipment that's used, it's kind of all the same on a baseline. I haven't seen too many that are like way over the top, because I saw you guys use the app. What is it? There was an app y'all used on your phones, the Ghost Meter app, or the Disc app.
Yeah, we've used the Ghost Tube apps. They've got a few different ones, but we have used those quite a bit.
So like those look, I like them. I should say I've played with them. I've had them in my house. I've, walked around whenever we're about to go on a ghost tour or whatever. I'm like, I'm going to download a new app and see how it works, kind of thing. So I like, I think switching it up a little bit also when you're doing like your prep, like maybe you haven't used a certain meter or certain, even cameras. Haven't used a certain camera in a while, switch out to like that camera. But for sure, it definitely is the prep of the historical factors, the truth behind the property, finding out every little thing you can, and then keeping an open mind to it. Because the other part with, at least for me, for research that I've seen in people, especially like where I work, is that once they see the research, that's the only research they'll believe. So then It's like an open mind. And then sometimes are people building things up in their mind more than what it actually is? So
I think those rumors that you mentioned are very interesting, because let's say we go to a place where there truly is like a spirit who can hear us and is an intelligent haunt. And if that exists, which I'm pretty sure it does, and you go into a place and they're having people come week after week telling the same story that isn't true about them. Like if that was me and I'm a spirit right now hearing that, like you're going to be frustrated, right? And eventually you're not going to want to respond to that, or maybe you get aggressive, and that's when things take a turn. So I think knowing that and bringing that there, but having the open mind, like you said, I think is really good advice, because perhaps you can help debunk that. And maybe that gives that spirit some sense of satisfaction in whatever that may be. So I like that a lot. But you asked, I think, about my favorite location. That was the second part of the question. So it only took me 10 minutes to get there. In thinking about this, I think there are a couple. So I've had some favorites and I've had some most impactful. Two favorites that come to mind. The first was the Whaley House. Now, the Whaley House investigation, we did make a video on this, and unfortunately we did make a video on it. The Whaley House is interesting because we did like their after hours ghost hunt, and part of it felt extremely staged by the person who was setting up some of the equipment from the home. They set up the music box, and you couldn't touch the music box. And the second they turned it on, it started playing, and it played the whole night. So it makes it eerie and it makes it creepy, and it just has that background noise, but it also felt gamey. But there's also some weird things going on at the Whaley House, and having that history behind it as America's most haunted house, having the famous haunting of Yankee Jim Robinson, and even the house being haunted when Thomas Whaley owned it. All of that history just in itself as a story is fascinating. But when we were there, I think this tour was an hour and a half or so, but sitting under this archway where Yankee Jim Robinson was supposed to have been hanged, I felt something on my neck. And it was one of those things, like I mentioned earlier, at the time, I'm just like, oh, there's something on my neck. And then afterwards, as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay, there's no one behind me. We have cameras that show there's nothing there. We have cameras that show that there's no bugs on my neck. Okay, then you start to think it's really odd that in a spot where someone was hanged, that I felt something around my neck. Like, that's really bizarre. And I don't have an explanation for that. So the setting of it being in Old Town San Diego, I really like the setting. And of course, that's just where the house is. So they didn't do anything to stage that. But I love that. I love the fact that it's a late night tour. They give you some history behind it at first. They do set the mood, which I didn't really need that, but it did make it eerie. And then the amount of activity that we had there, not just in that instance that I mentioned with my neck, but some of the other things that we captured that you can see on our YouTube channel, it was a fun location. Plus, we got to go there. My wife and I were lucky. Like, we had Annie who came down. We actually had a medical conference at the Hotel Coronado. And so that's why we were all there, and we just happened to set it up. And then we had some friends who joined us too. So all of that made that investigation special. If people are in San Diego, I know it's kind of on the opposite side of the country for you, but if you're ever in that location, I would still recommend it, despite some of it being staged, because that was a lot of fun. We also have a spot here in Utah. It is the Bethany Schoolhouse. So it's an old schoolhouse that's located about an hour south of Salt Lake City, and otherwise a part of the state where I would not ever go. However, that location is fascinating to me. Every time we have been there, we've had activity. We've had all sorts of activity. We've had loud bangs, we've had disembodied voices, we had EVPs. And the most fascinating part about this location for me, it's not because of the history of the location that I feel that the place is haunted. Like, it's the first time that something has happened there that has made me believe that artifacts could be haunted. I mean, we hear all of these stories behind artifacts, right? Like some of the most famous ghost stories that exist in major movies are based off haunted artifacts. Um, but I truly, and I can't even believe that I'm saying this, but I truly believe that there's an artifact in there that is very haunted. And so that has become one of my favorite places just because it was so eye-opening for me.
How many times have you actually investigated this school?
You know, we've been down there probably 4 or 5 times. A couple of times we've been on group investigations. And then, you know, group investigations can be great, especially if some of the places are pricier to rent out or if there's just a lot of room. But we prefer renting the place out on our own. And I think it kind of comes back to that initial, like, not skeptic, but really trying to make sure that if we hear sounds, that it's not because of someone else walking around in the room that we can account for. So I think we've been 4 or 5 times. Most of those have been on our own. That place is pretty wild, though. That is definitely one of my favorites.
That's awesome. So let's get into the VRBO.
Yes, yeah, it's a VRBO. I think people can rent it out on VRBO or Airbnb, either one.
Okay, so I know it was set up by your friends and your wife for your birthday.
Right. Yes. Yep.
How did you guys? How did they find the place?
So this was interesting. There's a couple of times throughout the year when my wife and I have traditionally like just hosted parties that we try to keep as tradition. And usually for friends, family, we do one on Christmas Eve. And then we tend to do like a Halloween theme party because of course it's Halloween stuff. It's the best time of year. So it was during one of those parties last year that we just started talking about locations to investigate. And, you know, as we're brainstorming what a YouTube channel would look like, we said, gosh, it would really be fun if we could just stay in a location. So part of the reason this came up is I'm a very early morning guy and I don't like to be out late at night, which doesn't really work well with traditional ghost hunting. So I said, what if we just rented a place where we could go to bed immediately after? And that kind of solves that problem. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything in Salt Lake or in Utah. And so we just went to Google and we started researching, and that's where we found Bethany's Home Sweet Haunted Home. And the owner, Elsie, does a great job of promoting it as a haunted VRBO, which I wish there were more of in this country. Like, if people have a haunted VRBO, please promote it. Please advocate. You will get people like us and your listeners who will go rent it, who will come out there. Like, don't shy away from the fact that it's haunted.
I will say, in St. Augustine, there's tons of bed and breakfasts.
So I think I just need to expand my ventures east as opposed to trying to stay confined to Utah is what you're telling me. I like it. So we stumbled upon it, to be honest, and we found that it's located in Jackson. We started taking a look at photos of the home. And we're like, wow, this home it's beautiful. She takes care of it. It has enough rooms for us. It's what we're looking for. And then we started looking at location. We said, okay, it's in Jackson. It's a small town. I don't know if you've ever been to Jackson. I had never been to Jackson. I never heard of Jackson. It's a small mining town established in the 1800s. It still is about an hour outside of Sacramento and not too far from wine country, which my wife and I have vacationed at in the past. So, you know, to entice her, because she draws a line somewhere at the paranormal and like fully immersing herself into staying into a VRBO is probably walking that fine line. But also we said, you know, this place is pretty close to Sonoma and Healdsburg, which is just another small wine town that she kind of grew up and her grandparents lived there, so she vacationed there. We said, why don't we make a big vacation out of all of this? And fortunately, we were able to plan enough ahead of time where we made it work for all of our schedules and decided to make the trip happen. So that's how initially the brainstorming happened. And then the planning occurred over the next 4 to 5 months, which honestly, sometimes the planning is the most fun of those trips, especially the paranormal, because you can psych yourself up and go online and listen to different podcasts promoting it and watch other YouTube channels. So that was a lot of fun. If people haven't done that before and they've ever considered it, I highly recommend it. It's very entertaining and a good sense of camaraderie for sure.
That's awesome. So first off, what I do remember most, which made me laugh the hardest, was the little tidbit that basically how big the town was large enough from one location to another to barely even be enough to drink half of a Diet Coke.
That makes me laugh so hard. Okay, so I was wondering if anyone was going to pick up on that. So the way that played out is Sarah wasn't in a whole lot of the video. Like she kind of stayed out of the ghost hunting part, and I wanted to involve her. And so I typed out a script after I edited the entire opener, and I'm like, I could read this, but let's get Sarah involved. Let's have her read it. So I set up my little recording, my audio device, like I have here in the office. I'm like, hey, honey, can you just come in here and just read the script? That's all I need you to do. And like half an hour later, I walk by and she's typing on the keyboard. I'm like, what are you doing? I just need you to read it. She's like, nah, it can be better. So I'm like, okay. And so she records it. I go back and listen to it. I hadn't added in the Diet Coke bit. And the funny part about this that I didn't think most people would pick up on, we wanted it to be a little bit of a growing inside joke with time. Jason drinks more Diet Coke than I've ever seen any human drink in my entire life. He always has a Diet Coke in his hands. It's like we have to edit him out for times that he's not drinking a Diet Coke. And so she had slid that in there to rib at Jason. So yeah, that was all Sarah's wit. And that really makes me laugh that you picked up on it.
The first time I watched the video, I was like, that is hilarious. Like, that's one way to be able to explain how long it took to get from point A to point B.
And like, I left it in there because I think that with some Airbnbs and VRBOs, I don't know this for sure, but I think that they try to a little bit seclude their address so that they're not just, letting people know that half the time or whatever percentage of the time that this place is vacant. And so I wanted to be mindful about that. But I also really appreciated what Elsie did to, she drove out to investigate with us. She's the owner of the VRBO, and she gave so much history, and I really appreciated her. So I wanted to advocate a little bit for her, like in a subtle way, without telling people where the house was located.
Yeah, and the house was big. Like,
it really is, and it's surprisingly big. There's the Haunted Historian. He did a podcast about Bethany's, and honestly, some of the stuff that he talked about, like I didn't see that as far as structure of the home, but he commented that it really is a lot bigger than it appears. And I completely agree with that. It's really deep, and it is a big home, which makes it a lot of fun and definitely creepy to investigate. That opening shot, I don't know that we did it justice, and I'm still trying to work on having a little bit better shots as I'm trying to learn the videography. Unfortunately, that's one of the things they didn't teach us in med school, but so I'm trying to get better at it. But the opening shot of that hallway, right when you walk in the door, it's creepy. It's just creepy. There's so many doors that you can't see into, but you could just imagine something popping its head out to look at you or grab you as you walk by. So it's beautiful, but it is eerie.
So I'm trying to remember did you guys actually stay in it? Was there someone who didn't stay in it?
Oh, Chrissy, you are very observant. You are good. So no, we didn't stay in it. So,
really?
and this was a thing, like amongst our group, is that part of the trouble is that we have a lot of team members with different levels of skepticism and also appropriate fear of the paranormal too. And so I think it's part of what makes us good and our camaraderie good and our investigating good, but it also makes it difficult. So we ended up kind of last minute not staying there. And for you, you can hear Annie comment a little bit that very first night. We captured, a really large SLS figure in the very back of the home. And we come to find out days later that that's where like one of the prime haunting locations is of this home. It's where my shirt gets pulled. It's where we hear the thing call me out by my profession. It's like, what in the world is this? And so we saw that early on the first night, and Annie has had some incredible paranormal experiences in the past. By far and away, she has had the most experiences of anyone in our group. And a lot of them are terrifying. I hope at some point she feels comfortable enough to share those. But when she saw that, I think for her, she's like, okay, this isn't a place I'm going to feel comfortable staying in the next 3 nights. And then my wife too, Sarah is a bit empathic and maybe more, but she's never fully wanted to explore that for just reasons that I am still not aware of. And so I think there was a level of both of those things. And as you try and balance those things, like investigating, like, yeah, I would have loved to have stayed there, but also you want to make sure that you respect those around you too, right? And that you don't put them in uncomfortable situations. Because at the end of the day, we're doing this for fun and to have an experience and to try to learn things. And so we didn't actually stay there. We ended up staying at a hotel just up the street. Jason actually, and this will be a good spot to put in a little shameless plug, actually ended up staying an impromptu night at the National Hotel, which is just up the street from Bethany. So the National Hotel is one of California's oldest running hotels, and it is most definitely haunted. We ended up having a wild experience that I'm very excited to show people. I'm just not done editing it, where we investigated so late in the night, after we got back from Bethany's, we walk on over to the National. We're like, hey, Jason, we're just going to investigate your room. Let's see if anything happens. And immediately stuff starts happening in his room. I'm like, well, you're going to have fun sleeping here tonight. And so we go back down, and I go to take out all of my gear out to my car because I was going to drive back to the hotel and just leave him there. And there are 2 workers just down at the front desk, and we hear him chatting, and we're like, hey, is anything, creepy ever happen here? And the person who ended up being the bartender and the bar manager, she looks at us. She's like, do you want to see some stuff? Do you want to hear some stories? And it's like 1 a.m. and there's no one else there. This town shuts down at like 10 at night. And we're like, yes. So she actually takes us downstairs into it was closed because they were renovating it, takes us downstairs to their bar where they have like their famous poker room where John Wayne used to go play poker. And she takes us in there. We play poker. Like, we hear spirits coming through a spirit box. She's got this massive mirror that also like somehow might be a portal. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but it was a wild night. That was one of the nights where we ended up staying outside of Bethany's. That video will be coming soon. But again, Chrissy, you're going to have to start cutting me off. That's a very long way for me to explain that, no, we didn't end up staying there. And I will say that even since the time that we left, we've talked to LC, the owner, a lot, and she's gone back and watched the film and caught things that I didn't catch. Jason, Jamie, I think the 3 of us are going to go back and stay there. And I would love, when we go back there, having a little bit more knowledge of the home, a little bit better knowledge of how to utilize YouTube and our cameras, I would love to live stream it overnight and, have people be able to watch and tune in and see if they capture anything. So I think that will happen in the future, hopefully the near future. But no, that was another good catch on your part. We didn't stay there.
No, and I appreciate the fact that you guys actually said it, because you never know with the shows that are actually on TV whether or not they're actually staying at their locations. So I actually do I like how honest and forthcoming you guys are with everything that you do within your investigation, that you're actually sharing. It's like almost like a diary.
Yeah, and that's our goal. Like, that's absolutely our goal, right? Is that we go out and have these experiences, and why not just let other people see them. And the other thing about that place, if anyone is on the West Coast or wants to fly out there, I really encourage you to go stay at this place. Like, we don't have any tie to LC. We don't get any commissions or anything like that. But the first night we were there, aside from the SLS figure that people can see, which, I mean, at the end of the day, it is a figure that you can't explain, which is creepy. But I didn't get a creepy vibe in that location. Neither did Jamie, neither did Jason, until Elsie showed up. And when she came the next day, it's like everything turned on. And that's where we got most of our evidence. And that's where things really seem to go wild. So there's really that different component. So I think the first night I would have been perfectly comfortable sleeping there. Had we continued to stay there, it would have been an interesting experience, right? You'd probably see more reaction out of me like you do with the Project Fear guys where they're screaming in the middle of the night. Like, you probably would have seen a lot more of that out of me, assuming I would have stayed there afterwards. But yeah, just a wild location, and one that we're excited to get back to.
The other thing I really appreciated was that Elsie had it was like a novel, like a novel size, just amount of information. Then she was just rambling off names, like just trying to help, is it this person? Is it this person? I'm not going to lie. I'm in Florida. We don't have basements here. So
oh, right.
I went into there. I was like, nope, that wouldn't have been me. It's just no.
Her knowledge and her research. So I think that's part of her background for what she does for work, is research and history. That book was so wild. Like, it really took research of a home to an entire next level. Like, the first night that we got there, we spent most of the time reading through those articles to try and pick up. And even since the time that we made the video, if people go back and watch it, they'll see that we made contact with one spirit in particular. She actually has found since that time that person had a son who also died in the home by the same name, which could really kind of help give us some answers, but also pose more questions about some of the responses that we had on that episode. So she really is an incredible historian for a location. And that home, being in a town that most people haven't heard of, just has such a rich history for that specific location. It's wild. And it's, not a surprise as to why it would be haunted.
That is true. I mean, it's most of the time when I watch the episodes, depending on which ghost hunting show it is, the mining towns seem to have the most. Because
yes.
You have the gambling factors that happen. You have the immigration that was happening. You have the tragedies that happen while working in the mines. And all of the greed that happened, the American gold rush and all of that. Like, that creates a lot of energy and synergy that happens and just keeps going. And the thing is I do think some people are actually triggers for the paranormal. Like, if they're completely engrossed in a location and those spirits are absolutely comfortable, they're gonna show up for that person. And I think that's what she's done, is she's created a bond. She's taken the time to actually get to know the stories, figure out the names, find the locations of the house of where, maybe they stayed or maybe that's where they passed. And she just connects with them, but she also treats them with a lot of respect. And it was the same for you guys too. I really don't like the instigating factor of like Ghost Adventures, where it's instigating, and just to get the negative reaction, because that's not the point of like hunting in the paranormal. The point of the paranormal is to prove it's there, not to create animosity in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more in everything that you said. And starting with the last part, let's take it back. Like, again, say we pass on and we're spirits and we're either trapped or we choose to stick around a home, like whatever it may be. If someone's there and we can hear them talking to us, why would we ever want to engage with someone who's just there to antagonize or call us out? It's just, I don't know. To me, it's a common sense thing and something we really try hard to make sure that we're being mindful in the questions that we ask and in the way that we go about it. But I guess one last point on the home, I completely agree. We have found, at least it's my belief, and so is Jason's, it seems like some of the locations that don't necessarily get hyped as being the most haunted. I did mention the Whaley House as being quoted as America's most haunted home, but sometimes the ones that are promoted the most aren't always the most haunted, right? Like, you get you get the world famous museum in Las Vegas that is supposed to have the most haunted artifacts. You know, we've been there a few times and haven't really had a whole lot happen. But then you go to some of these locations where there's just kind of more of a natural history. She also has a creek that is literally in the backyard of this place. So you have water as that conductor, you have gold, you have the minerals that are associated in that land, you have tragedy. And so you have that emotion, that passion that could trigger. And then you have history, and you just have people who have been there time after time after time. And all of that can absolutely add up to it. She even has documents of two men who were working at I believe it was either Kennedy or the Argonaut gold mine, not who died in the disaster, but did have accidents and then came to her home and then ended up dying shortly thereafter. So that plays a part in that history as well. And it is a perfect recipe for what we think of would create a haunting. And it's there.
That's awesome. Have you ever, I don't know if you, because you said Discovery Plus, and I'm like, oh, there it is. Like, that's my streaming platform right there.
Yeah.
Shudder, but Shudder for the horror movies. But with Discovery Plus, and you were talking about like the old towns, and like you're about Midwest area, right? Utah?
Yep.
Okay. So did you ever watch the Ghost Town Terror?
I don't know that I did. The name doesn't strike with me off the top of my head.
So there is a ghost town this woman bought for like, God, I don't know. It seems like dirt cheap. It had like 6 or 7 different haunted houses, and they've done investigations out there. And it was an interesting show. It reminds me of all the stuff you guys are talking about, because once again, it's not necessarily about like trying to get that negative reaction. It's more so just trying to find out what exactly it is, what's happening, who's there, what is the history, why are they still kind of hanging out. I don't want to say stuck, because you don't know if they're truly stuck, or maybe they just want to stay.
Right.
But yeah, no, you guys are like, I'm so glad you reached out. I was so excited. I watched it. I was binge watching it when I was working that day. I was like, this is awesome. And then my husband came home and I was like, you have to watch this.
Hey, good. And, you know, I think we're all our own worst critics. And I will say this, I'm glad people enjoy it. And I'm glad people are getting that sense of a little bit of laughter, a little bit of trying to debunk things. Like all of that is the vision for it. This will continue to get better. And particularly like with our audio and our video, every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, this is not similar to this show that I watch on TV or this show. So we're always trying to improve it. And hopefully it will just continue to get better and better and keep people entertained and want to interact and like have very similar questions that you're asking now. Like all of that sense is exactly what we want, because why not share in this hobby, community, belief? Why not do it together? And so that makes me happy to hear you say that.
Awesome. I do have one question, because I remembered this. Have you guys figured out what the thing with the mirrors is? Like,
no.
Any further looking into that?
So there has been further looking into it. And I want to create an episode with Jason, and actually he's coming over to my place tonight. We're going to brainstorm this. I want to look more at the physics and review the physics of mirrors, because trying to combine that element, you know, like with our Dr. Ghost Hunter thing and the scientific part, there really could be something there, you know, and there's different shows that talk about mirrors and mirrors being portals. I think the closest thing that I've seen to a scientific explanation on how mirrors could be portals would be the Y-Files. I don't know if you watched that show. He did an episode, I think it was based more on time travel than it was on actually looking at spirits, but the mirror concept was there and it's very interesting to me. And so I don't know what to say about mirrors, because there's really one part of my brain that's like, Chad, this is ridiculous. Like it's a mirror. Nothing spooky is going to crawl out of it. It's not like the Ring movie is real and someone's going to be crawling out of my TV screen. But on the other side, there are things that I can't explain. we don't have video of this. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago, but we mentioned it, I think, in one of the videos that, Annie goes running into this bathroom at this haunted restaurant. And this is one of, I'm sure, many where Ghost Adventures there. Bagans runs in, rips his shirt off, and yells at a demon to attack him. We say that no less than 100 times every time we go on a ghost hunt. It just hasn't made it into a video yet, but just jokingly. But she goes into the bathroom and looks into the mirror and does like the Bloody Mary thing, which is like, okay, it's folklore, it's a thing. But then we do capture something that sounds like a hiss. And I heard it in real time and I couldn't debunk it. And so it's like, okay, that was weird and I can't explain it. And it probably was just from like clothes wrestling or something else that I just couldn't create. Appears to be 3 or 4 spirits in that room. Now, I didn't take that photo, so I assume it's real, but I didn't take it. And then we have the odd thing happen with Annie where, she's standing right in front of that mirror. And part of the thing with that is she had someone very close to her pass away. And we're pretty sure that the parts that we didn't show on the video was that person trying to communicate with her. And so that was weird too. And it's right in front of that mirror. So people will see with this national video that we have coming out soon, there's more mirror stuff there as well. And so I really could see that being a focus of us trying to find some science behind it. But with most things in the paranormal, unfortunately, I just don't think that we're going to get it, but we're certainly going to try. And that's part of what we set out to do as well. So prior to this, I never had experiences with mirrors. I don't know if it's something you've had experiences with, or if you've heard any of your listeners having experiences with, but I know it's existed. I just haven't faced it myself.
I have seen it in different shows. So like Jack Osbourne's Homecoming that's on Discovery Plus, his female investigator, she does use the technique. And you could probably check it out there. She does go into really good detail. I don't quite remember it because sometimes it goes way over my head. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then also the one I was just talking about earlier, the Ghost Town Terror, they used the only difference was when they used mirrors, they made like a whole 4 walls of mirrors.
Right.
And then they also used like a television on the static kind of channel to see if faces pop through. So there's a couple different ways. They do believe a good portion of the paranormal, at least the ones that have broadcasted it, do believe that mirrors sometimes are a portal. Or what happens is, like a face will distort, your face will distort. So that must be like the spirit trying to communicate through. Maybe their face is trying to take shape. But it's still one of those iffies because whenever they do show it on TV, you're not really getting a good look of it.
Right.
So, yeah. I've heard of it, just haven't seen like good.
It's just fascinating. And the fact that, I have heard, I guess I should clarify, like a lot of the different shows and like you hear people talk about it, I guess just first or secondhand experiences I hadn't had. But when there's so much history behind people talking about it, it makes you wonder, like all these people who are maybe having experiences, is there truly something to it? And maybe, and that's just the weird thing for me, right? Like my profession and my day job, like if a patient walked in the room and said, oh, tell me about this, like I wouldn't tell them that I think mirrors are portals. At least I wouldn't have a year ago, but I don't know. Like, as you can see, I'm very conflicted from the very first question that you asked me. And it's just a very interesting part of the paranormal.
Has she thought about digging deeper into it, or is she kind of like leaving it off to the side? Like, I don't really want to know.
Elsie, I think she does want to know. I don't know that she's necessarily looked more into the mirror. There's a chance that she got rid of the mirror. I'll have to pull it up on our social media. I do know that right around the time that we were there, she said that she had a group of people who came in, and when they left, they'd kind of left the house trashed. But interestingly, there was a blanket draped over that mirror by the people who stayed there. And she's like, I don't know what happened, but it's interesting that this was the mirror that they chose to cover up. And it just makes you wonder why, right? It adds to that mystery.
So there is kind of like wives' tales, depending on where you're from in the areas.
Sure.
So when someone passes, usually in a home, they tell you to cover up the mirrors so that the soul doesn't get trapped.
Right. That's right.
So that could be a reason why maybe they saw something they didn't want to see. Maybe that was a mirror from something that happened and they're like, oh no.
Which is terrifying because the way that that bed faces, you know, if you sit up, you are staring right into that mirror. And maybe I got to go back and I guess reflect on some of my words here. I guess maybe part of the reason that Annie was one of the ones, not the only one, but one of the ones who didn't want to sleep there is because I kept joking and telling her that I was going to put her in that back room by herself. And her being the one who scares the easiest, maybe in retrospect, that probably wasn't the nicest thing for me to do.
Now, at the very end of your video, before you guys officially leave your location, turning in the key and everything, at the end of your stay, you guys do one last walkthrough. So did you find anything additional in the walkthrough other than what you had in the videos, or?
The walkthrough at the very end, we didn't find anything. Now, the odd part at the very end of that clip, so we were cleaning up and we were just about ready to leave. We go downstairs, which is where the kitchen is. So that's like the only odd thing about the home is that the kitchen is downstairs in the basement. So we go down to grab some of the things that we had. And the basement door, the one that is typically locked off, that Elsie had opened up and allowed us to go investigate in, where we had all that activity the night before, it was open, like notably open. Not like we forgot to latch it and it just creaked, and there's no air vents down there. So I don't think that the air conditioner turning on would have caused that type of airflow to open that door. But that door was open. And as soon as I recognize it, Jason, I believe, is right behind me. Now, this is interesting because one thing I can't explain, if you go back and listen to it, I call out and say something and it sounds like me echoing. But I didn't echo in that hallway at anywhere else in our audio. So it almost sounds like someone is saying the same thing over my voice at the same time. I didn't comment on it or point it out in the video because I don't even know how in the world to explain that. But at that time, we did hear something upstairs. We heard a squeak. We heard something that we can't explain, and we didn't think it was outside. And we went and searched the house. We didn't find anything. But again, interesting because it was right after Elsie was there, and it was that next day, and things just seemed like they were picking up a bit. That house is so fascinating. Yeah, it was creepy. It was a creepy place.
It was creepy, but it was a really nice looking place. I really like, normally when you think of like haunted locations, you kind of think like run down a little bit. She has done amazing keeping it up, making sure, because even when you guys walked in, the floors weren't real creaky.
No.
The initial, like, it wasn't creaky. That hallway looked long, but you know, it was well kept. The door that you were talking about at the end that did open, you guys did the whole testing on it, and it does look like a heavy door, and it does look like it's really hard to kind of like make it come open. So there's, yeah, I mean,
you're exactly right with everything that you said. Older home, but it is very up to date and very nice. Makes it very easy to stay in. And yeah, as far as that door, I completely forgot about that. We have no explanation for that one either. You can hear at that point, Elsie calls out. She's like, I just heard something, like it was a voice or something. And Jamie dismissed it that it was the door. And I went back, I had to listen to that 50 times as I'm editing it. I don't know that it was the door. I don't know that it was a person, but just adds to another layer of creepy, of some voice or something happening as that door was moving.
well, what other locations do you guys have lined up so far?
So we have a few lined up, a couple that we've done. We did the National, which will be our next video coming out. We did the Kennedy Gold Mine, which is maybe 5 miles from Bethany's. And we had some really interesting experiences. I hope that my digital audio recorder was running. So that may or may not make it to YouTube. If the audio is poor, we'll just scrap it. We have a location near Salt Lake City that's in Park City, Utah, which kind of hosted a lot of the Winter Olympic Games back in 2002. And again, an old mining town. There is a bar that we will be visiting this weekend and has not traditionally had access for paranormal investigators. So we're really excited to get into there. We've got an old theater out in Utah that is just kind of open up its doors that we'll be going out to as well. So we have those lined up. We've got a haunted mill nearby, and then we are going to have another road trip, and it'll happen sometime in the next year. It's either going to be back to Jackson or try and get out east and hit a number of locations out there. So if people have any suggestions or desires of where they would want to see us go, we would love to hear them. And that way I can bug all my friends that we need to go do another road trip.
I was about to say Florida's got plenty. St. Augustine itself is a huge one.
Yeah. And with that being the case, we may just have to make it on down there to do that, because if there are multiple locations that we can hit in one trip, similar to what we did with Jackson, that is an ideal way to do it. Makes for a tiring trip, but a very fun trip.
Yeah, I would recommend it. St. Augustine is always really fun. Like I said, they have tons of ghost tours you can do yourself, or they have some that are also guided, and they like everyone's got a story somewhere. And St. George Street itself is like the oldest street there. And you know, you got bars, you got the Airbnbs, you still have the fort that's still up and active. There's the oldest lighthouse that's also
right.
So, and with the lighthouse, you don't necessarily have to go in it because the grounds themselves are haunted by different ghosts around there too. And then also the river itself, because there was a big massacre that happened. It's said that the river sometimes will look red because of the massacre, because that's the Matanzas River is their massacre. So,
oh gosh, yes, yeah. You've got the whole lineup there as well.
Yeah, Savannah as well. Savannah's another one that everyone likes to go to and do. And Louisiana, tons of places. Obviously, New Orleans.
And you know, I love you mentioned that kind of everyone has a story. And when we were up in Sonoma, even though our intent in Sonoma wasn't to go ghost hunting, everybody there had a story. Everyone, like you would even just say that you had a video camera, not only the fact that you were going to go film for ghost hunting, they'd be like, oh yeah, we got this ghost back here. You should come check it out. It adds to that entire experience and enjoyment, I guess, of the paranormal. So I like that a lot. We may just have to come down to your neck of the woods to make that happen.
It would be awesome. Or go like to the complete East Coast, hit up like South Carolina, Charleston and stuff, because not only is it a Navy area, but it's another one of those old historic towns. And they have the old jails, and you have what else is in? Oh, the warships and stuff that are over there. So
I just need to quit my day job, find a new job back east, and then the ghost hunting thing will be much easier. So I think that's a good way to go. And I did just message Elsie. She still has the mirror. She still has the haunted mirror. So
okay.
I was thinking maybe she got rid of it, but she did not.
Well, you know, some people they'll sit there and they'll figure it out.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long, so let's go. I want to go ahead and wrap it up. So where can people kind of check you out, or, you know, like kind of converse with you, whether it's on social media, or your YouTube channel is Dr. Ghost Hunters on YouTube. And then anything for your social medias?
Yep. Social media is the same. Instagram, I'm on there quite a bit at Dr. Ghost Hunters, and you'll see some extra videos and things just of us doing our outside of filming stuff, where you can catch us, and you can always message us there. I'd be happy to interact with people through there, but YouTube is really where our videos are. We love to get people subscribing, watching, and honestly, like I say this honestly, if you want to see us do something different or video different or different techniques, send them to us. Like, we are just like everybody else out here. Like I assume everyone here is yelling at their TV like I am, like, why aren't you trying this? Or why are you doing this? Maybe you're not, but if you have those comments for our videos, please, we welcome them. And we'd love to incorporate it. And if we're ever in your neck of the woods investigating, we'd love to have you come investigate with us. So that's on YouTube, Dr. Ghost Hunters.
St. Augustine is my spot. Like, that's our home away from home. So yeah, anytime you guys are down here, please let me know. Or even up in Savannah. I'll even meet you up in Savannah as well, because it's not far from here either.
Yeah, you got it.
But yeah, if you ever want to come back, I would love for you guys, you yourself by yourself, whether you want to bring your friend Jason or your wife or your whole team, like please feel free to just reach out anytime and we can record another session.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I may just have to take you up on that.
Yeah, anytime. Schedule's completely open pretty much. So
Awesome.
yeah. But I really do appreciate you taking the time and talking about your experiences and your background and everything in the paranormal. I really love when it's someone from a science background who does this stuff because it gives so much more insight and a little bit more skepticism that's needed in the paranormal investigation. So I really do appreciate it. And I hope you have fun at your next location that you guys are going to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we will. And I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I hope you have a good weekend. Thanks for joining, Chad.
Thank you.
All right, you have a good one.
Okay, thanks.